Hello and welcome to Digital Woodcarver. My name is Laney Shaughnessy, and in this video I'm going to walk you through how to design your very first project. Now we're going to assume that you've already installed your Vectric software, whether it be Vectric VCarve Desktop, Vectric VCarve Pro, or Vectric Aspire. And we're going to also assume that you've probably already installed your Planet-CNC TNG motion controller software. Now, if you haven't installed your Planet-CNC software, there's also a video for that located at our digitalwoodcarver.com website under the owner's menu, Getting Started, where you'll find all of these videos, such as how to install your Vectric software, how to install your Planet-CNC software, how to design your very first project, and then finally, how to carve your very first project, which will be the next step in this progression. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get over to the software, and we'll go ahead and get into it in creating our very first project. Now we're going to do a very simple sign project. We're going to create a very nice little sign that will just kind of help you get the feel for the software and everything. And we're going to take it step by step. So just follow along and you should be just fine. But at any time, if you ever have questions or you get stuck and need some help, you can reach us by calling us at 833-392-2621, extension number 2, and I'd be happy to help you. We're available for those calls Monday through Saturday, 24 hours a day. And so anytime you need some help, just reach out and I can assist you in any way possible. All right, so looking at the software, as you can see on the screen here, I am working in Vectric VCarve Pro. Now everything that we're going to be doing in this project can be done in Vectric VCarve Desktop, Vectric VCarve Pro, or Vectric Aspire. So don't worry, you're not going to miss anything. Everything that we're going to walk you through today can be done in your software if you're not working in VCarve Pro. Okay, all right, so the first thing we want to do is when we open up our Vectric software, this is kind of our welcome screen. And in our welcome screen, we have our startup tasks that we can do. We can create a new file. We can open a new file from a template that we've created. Or we can open an existing file. If we've worked on something, we can open an existing file. Now, any of the files that we've worked on in the past would be listed under recently opened files, as you can see here, for quick access and everything. But I'm assuming if you're watching this, how to carve your first project, that you're just now getting started. So we're going to go ahead and click on create a new file. Now when we do that, that's going to take us to our job setup. Now our job setup is basically telling the software how big our material is that we're carving. What is the size of that material? What's the thickness of it? Where we're going to zero out our machine. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then, then that will give us the area that we're going to be working in when we're doing our drawing. So let's take a look at this job setup here. In our job setup, we could be doing a single-sided job. That means we're carving on one side of the material. We could do a double-sided job, meaning that we're going to carve on one side, and then at some point that board is going to be flipped over, and we're going to carve on the back side. So when it comes to a double-sided project, think of like a picture frame. The front of that picture frame would be one side, carved all those decorative, ornamental design. And then we would flip that board over to carve out the pocket area and the cut through hole where the glass or the picture would go type of thing. So that would be kind of an example of a two-sided project. And then also we have rotary projects. Now if you have a digital woodcarver with a 4th axis, you're going to be creating a rotary job if you're working on that 4th axis. So that would be a rotary job. Now in this video, we're going to be creating a single-sided project. So we want to make sure that that's selected. And then we want to set up the job size. Now this is where we're going to tell the software how big our material is. I want you to notice over here that in the job size, the width represents the x-axis. What that means is the width of your computer screen from left to right is the x-axis of your CNC machine. The height is the y-axis. So the height of your computer screen up and down, that is the y-axis of the machine. And then of course the thickness represents the thickness of your material. Now in this example, I'm going to be working with a 14-inch long piece of material that is 10 inches wide, and it is going to be 3/4 of an inch thick. Now one of the things to note about the job setup or any part of the software where you can enter in a value, a number. These little boxes are like little calculators. We can add, subtract, multiply, divide. We can even do fraction to decimal conversion. What I mean by that is, let's say for instance you are just getting started, you don't know a whole lot about fractions and decimals or woodworking and things like that. If you know that your material is 3/4 of an inch thick, you can simply type in the fraction followed by the equal sign, not the enter key, but the equal sign on the keyboard, and it'll convert it into the decimal for you, right? So if you know the fraction, you just don't know the decimal for that fraction, you can do that conversion. When it comes to adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, you would type in a value followed by your symbol, whatever it may be, followed by another value, and then again you would hit the equal key on your keyboard and it would do that math for you. So it's like little miniature calculators. All right, so let's get back to our 14 by 10 board that's 3/4 of an inch thick. We'll be working in inches. Now it comes to the Z0 position. We have the option of touching off on the top of our material, which is called the material surface, or the bottom of the material, which is called the machine bed. Now the machine bed term means whatever the bottom of our material is clamped to, that is considered the machine bed. So if my board is clamped straight to the table, then my tabletop is the machine bed. But if I put a waste board, a sacrificial spoil board on my table, and my project board is clamped to that, then that spoil board's surface becomes the machine bed. Okay? Now in this case, we're going to start out simple. We're going to touch our bit off when we put our bit in. We're going to zero out the Z0 position on the top of the material, on the material surface. Once we get that selected, now we have the XY datum. Now that's just a fancy way of saying our XY0, our XY home position, our starting position. And we can start from the center of our material or any of the four corners. Now for simplicity, we're going to start from the center because we can take our material, we could stretch a straight edge right across that material and make a mark from diagonal corner to corner, stretch a straight edge across there and make another mark, and that's going to identify the circle, that project board, the center, not the circle. It's going to identify the center of that project board, or you can just measure and mark the center, whichever is easiest for you, but we will be zeroing out our router bit at the center of the material for this job. Under modeling resolution, we have a drop-down menu with three options: standard, high, and very high. Now this has to do when you're working with 3D models. Now we're not working with any 3D models in this video, but there are other videos that we've created that will help you with 3D modeling when you get into that phase. But I'm going to strongly advise that you crawl before you run and kind of just get your feet wet and get started before you jump into 3D. It's not complicated or overly complicated, but it is involved, right? So with our model resolution, if we were working with a 3D model, the resolution refers to our 3D view here, and the resolution, the number of pixels or points that it took to generate this three-dimensional image here is based on our model resolution. Standard is about 1 million pixels, high is 2 million pixels, and very high is 3 million pixels. I'm going to recommend to you that your default job setup for when you're setting up jobs, that you choose the very high resolution. Because when we are working with models, we want a very high resolution, and I want it to become muscle memory for you. That becomes your default, that very high option. Now when it comes to the appearance is basically in our 3D view, we can make our material look like anything that we want with different types of material surfaces and things. And I personally like working with a maple or a Canadian maple because it's a nice clean background, and when I'm looking at my toolpath previews and things, I can see the cuts much cleaner. But of course you can absolutely set it up to whatever option you would like to choose. So we have a single-sided job that is 14 by 10 by 3/4. We're going to zero out our Z on the material surface. start from the center. Our XY datum position is going to be the center of that material. We've got our resolution at very high, and we're going to click OK, and that will take us into our CAD operation, which is computer aided design. Basically, it's all of our drawing and design tools. So under our drawing tab here, we have all of our file operations and drawing tools such as shapes and text and things. We have some transformation tools that help us move, rotate, size our parts and things. And then we have some editing tools where we can trim and clip away or join things together. We have offset and layout if we're doing like a layout of a certain type of thing. Think of like the American flag, where you have your layout of your stars, that union where all the stars are laid out a certain way. We can do that. We can lay out that kind of grid and stuff. Aside from the drawing tab, we do have a modeling tab where we're working with 3D models. We have clip art tab where all of our models that came with our software are stored. And then we have a layers tab where we can kind of, if our design is complicated, we can separate it into layers and stuff. And these things, learning about those things will come in the future, you know, as you get starting it going and all. And it's really straightforward, very user friendly. So we're going to be working in one layer today, so we won't need anything in the other layers. And let's go back to our drawing tab so we have our drawing tools. Now, when it comes to learning about your tools and things, we have a very cool little tool right up here, this little question mark, which is called Get Help on This. And what that means is if I click on a tool, I can click on that question mark and it's going to open up the web browser to the manual of the software. It's a 400-page manual, or over 400 pages, but it'll take us straight to that page about that tool. Now I can read about that tool, how to use it, if there's any keyboard shortcuts associated with it, and things like that. So it's pretty cool that we can get to that information right away when we need it. So let's go ahead and close out of that and come back to our software. We're going to start off with creating our border. So on this project here, I'd like a nice little border around the inner edge. I probably want that border to be either 3/4 of an inch or 1 inch in. So let's get started there. Let's go ahead and we're going to open up under Create Vectors. We're going to open up our Draw Rectangle tool. And we have, make sure that these two buttons right here at the top are on. On means that there's a little blue box around them. If they were off, there would not be a box around it, right? This will help us with snapping to different objects or to our material, that white area there that we're working in. And so I'd like a square corner rectangle, and I'm going to take my mouse and right on the corner, if you notice when I get the mouse close to that corner, this little black square pops right above the cursor, and it means it's snapping that cursor to that point. And so I want to get to that point, and I want to hold down my left mouse button, and I'm going to drag my rectangle from one corner to the opposite diagonal corner, and you'll see that mouse change when I get there. That little circle with a crosshair in it, and I'm snapped to that point, and I'm going to let go of my mouse and create that rectangle. Now we can close that tool, and we want to take our rectangle and we want to now create our border from it. So we're going to offset inward this rectangle to create our border. So I'm going to go down to my offset and layout tools, and our first tool there is the offset tool. And we'll go ahead and open that up. And one of the things that we want to do is are we offsetting outward, inward, or in both directions, right? Well, we're going to offset inward. I want my line to come inward. And so we're going to go ahead and click on inward. And I would like a distance of 1 inch. Let's take a look at that first and we'll decide if that looks good or not. I'd like to have sharp corners, and I want to delete that original rectangle that I drew because I won't need it anymore. And I want to select the new. So I want all three of these boxes checked when I click offset. And yeah, a 1 inch border looks good there. Now, the rectangle border looks great and everything, but I'd like to dress it up a little bit. So we're going to put some radiused edges on the four corners. Let's go ahead and close out of our offset tool, and we're going to go right back into that rectangle tool. And our rectangle is selected. It's still pink. You know, we haven't deselected it. And just so you know what deselect and select means, if I just click anywhere on white space, you'll see that pink dotted line turn black. So that object is no longer selected. When an object is selected, and we put our mouse pointer right on one of the lines and we click on it, it's either going to be a pink dotted line or a pink solid line, depending on the type of object that it is. If it's a vector object like a circle, rectangle, star, and things like that, it's going to be a dotted line. But if it's a text object like a font, it'll be a solid line. Okay, and so we want the object selected before we open up that rectangle tool. And in that rectangle tool, I'm going to come down to radius internal. I'd like to have a nice little internal radius on the four corners. And I'd like a radius of 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to put in 0.75, and I'm just going to simply click apply to create that nice radius there. Okay. Now, while we're in the rectangle tool, I want you to notice these green nodes that are at the four corners here. And these nodes allow me to, I could take my mouse over one of them and I could pull them and I could actually change my radius of that rectangle. And as we change that radius, you can see that it updates over here, you know, in our tool. As we're changing that radius, it will change accordingly and everything. So what I want to go do is I want to go back to our 3/4 inch radius, and I'm just going to simply click apply to get back to that, and we're all set. We can close that tool. It's a good idea to close your tool after you're done using it. You don't want a tool open. Now, in some cases, tools, when you open them, they don't have a little menu that pops up on the left. And let me give you an example. So if I open up the circle tool, a menu pops up here over on the left side. And some tools don't have that menu, such as my edit text spacing and curve tool. When I click on that, nothing opens up. But if you notice, my mouse cursor now has a little T next to it. So I'm in that tool. I'm in that particular tool. And there are two ways to close to get out of that tool to go back to our normal selection mode. And number one is to go back to edit objects, the first icon here, which is selection mode, and that will get us out of that tool. The second way is to hit the escape key on the keyboard, and that will close that tool as well. Okay, so I've got my rectangle border here looking good. Now I want to create some text. Now, when it comes to this, we're gonna actually bring in a picture, a photo, a clip art image, if you will, and we're gonna do some tracing just to show you that as well, because a lot of people want to be able to trace images. So I thought I would include that in this video, and I'm going to be making a little sign to hang on, you know, a customer's daughter's bedroom door, and it's going to be Janet's room sign, you know, and Janet likes horses. So we're gonna bring in an image of a horse, and we're gonna do some tracing on that. Don't worry, it's not gonna get too complicated. It's pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and let's start by, before doing the text, let's start by going up to our file operations here and import bitmap. So a bitmap means a pixeled image. It's gonna be a JPEG file, PNG, bitmap, GIF, TIFF, JPEG. These pixel type images, we can import them into our software. So I happen to have a perfect little photo for this. So we're going to open up our bitmap image, and I'm going to go into my downloads folder, into my graphic files folder here, and I've got this nice little horse head here, and I'm going to select that, and I'm going to click open, and it's going to import it right in. Now, don't worry that it imports it in over our rectangle border or anything like that, because we're going to be able to trace this image. Not we, the software is going to help us trace it, and then we can size it down once it's traced and everything. Now, I'm not a big advocate of sizing an image before we trace it, because depending on the image's quality, and we want a high quality image, but depending on the resolution of the image, we may size it beyond its aspect ratio or its pixelation point, and it could distort that image. Once we trace it, it'll be a vector. It'll no longer be a pixeled image, and that vector is a scalable graphic. Then we can size it up or down however we want. So when you import an image in, I would recommend keeping it at the size that it comes in, and then do your tracing to get those vectors created. Then you can size it down. So what I want to do is, when I imported this image, it was selected, so we have a pink dotted line around it, just like we talked about earlier. Up here in our view bar across the top, we have a magnifying glass that has a pink dotted line around it as well. I want to go ahead and click on that, and that just, it's going to zoom into that selected object. I want to see that image up close and personal so I can really see the detail and stuff. Now, if the border in the background or whatever design you have in the background is kind of distracting to you, this is where layers comes in handy. When we, up here in our layers box or down here in our layers tab, either one, when we imported that bitmap, it created a new layer, a bitmap layer. There's a little light bulb here that I can turn that layer on and off. Same thing with layer 1. Layer 1 is our default layer where we drew our rectangle border. I can turn that light bulb on and off to hide that vector. Now if I'm going to turn layer 1 off just to hide that, that rectangle border so I can trace my image, then I need to make sure that I add a new layer. And the layer, it's nice to name them. You can use the default names, but I'm just going to call this the horse. And now I want to make sure that that layer is selected in bold. So when we select on the layer names, it will bolden them up. And the bold layer means that that is the active layer. That's the layer we're working in. Now I can turn the light bulb off to layer 1 to hide that, to get it out of my way, and then I can do my tracing. And everything that I trace is going to get put onto my horse layer, layer 2, right? So now that we have that, we can go ahead to anywhere in white space or gray space on our board, we can click and it'll close that layer box. Okay. All right, so I've come back over here and selected the image. Now over in our drawing tools, under create vectors, the last row, first icon, we have a little icon, looks like a little bird with his tail being traced, and that's our trace bitmap tool. So we're going to open that up, and we have two options to trace the image, color or black and white. But first things first, I want you to notice, as soon as I opened up that tool, it faded the image out. Did you see that? Well, that is because by default, our bitmap fading here is set kind of to the midpoint. And what we want to do, step number 1, is we want to take and turn that bitmap fading to none, right? We want to see the image in its full color or black and white, whatever it may be. So we want to slide and turn the fading off basically to none. Now, up here, I can choose color or black and white to trace my image. And what that simply means is if I choose the color option, the software is going to look at the image and it's going to lay out up to 16 shades of colors that it finds. And if we zoom in really tight, even though blurry, there are different shades of colors in here. We have our deep black, and we have some light grays and even lighter grays and darker grays. So the software identifies those shades of colors, up to 16 of them, and it lays them out in a grid here. And if we do the color tracing, we simply select the color that we want to trace around. Now, our trace color is red, but you can choose any color that you want. You want to make sure that you change your trace color to a color that stands out but also is not in your photo, right? So red stands out really well, and it's not in my photo, so I can go ahead and use that. And when I start checking off these boxes, those areas for that color will start filling in with my trace color. So what my goal is, if I zoom in really tight here, is to check off these boxes to make sure that I get, what my goal is to get a nice, good representation of my image with that fill color. So I want to go through and select until I get the best fill possible, but I don't want to go too far where it traces everything, right? You know, where it fills in everything. So there's a certain point where we're going to, stop. And if I zoom out and look at this, I've got a really good fill of my trace color, and I don't really need to go any further, but I could continue on because this is a high resolution image and things, but I don't want to go too far to where it may obstruct my detail, or it starts picking up any trash or background stuff that we don't want in that image. So looking at this here, I've got a really good fill of trace red there, my red color. And so I'm going to use that. And then I can go down and set my corner fit and my noise filter. So the corner fit simply means this: when it draws those lines, when it traces those lines around those red areas, it's going to, the lines are either going to be loose or tight depending on our settings. Now, if we're too tight, the lines are really rigid and stiff. If we're too loose, they're a little sloppy. We want to find that perfect fit, and Vectric has done that for us already. The default corner fit, which is 82%, is really bang on, I want to say perfect. That's a good word. It's 90% of the time right what we need. I've used and taught this software for a very long time, and I very rarely find myself going off the default corner fit unless I really need stiff, rigid lines for something. Okay, so we're going to click on default corner fit to set that. And now the noise filter, if this was a low resolution image, the pixels in that image, I may want to ignore some of the trashy lower quality pixels, the blurry pixels and stuff. And so I may want to turn my noise filter up, and we can go from 1 to 10. By default, it's set to 2. I typically operate in a 4 to 5 range. It's kind of my default, but you can play around with that and pick a range that's suitable for you. So from there, we don't need to do anything with bitmap fading. We're just going to come down and click preview, and it'll trace the image. Now here's where fading does come in handy. I can turn the fading of my image on now, and it will fade out my image so I can see the actual lines that were traced, right? So fading off, there's my image. Fading on, I can just see the trace lines and stuff. So it's a nice way to kind of verify your trace lines and everything. Okay, so I've got the area traced, and what I'm going to do is, since we're working on the left hand side, I'm going to move on over to the right. So here I go. All right, and while we're working over here, so you can see all the buttons and the features and everything, and the once we've done our preview, then we want to apply that preview to lock it into place. We want to apply that preview, and then we're going to simply close the tool. Now, once you've traced your image and everything, you no longer need the actual image to be visible. So we're going to go back up to our little layer box up here, and we're going to turn the light bulb off for that bitmap layer to turn it off and hide it. And now we have our horse. While I'm in the layer box, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my layer 1 to get my border back. And now I can come in here and size my horse. So let's talk about when we select items. When we single click, we want to put our mouse right on any one of the lines here. We can select our item. And if we double click on that line or any line, it puts the item in what's called transform mode. Now, if we looked at our tools over on the left here, transform mode means that we can move, size, rotate, mirror or copy, distort, or align. And so you'll see these little boxes pop up around our object when we select it. When we double click on it, it puts that object into transform mode. And the white boxes allow me to size the object, and your 4 corner boxes will keep the aspect ratio, the 4 corner white boxes. So I can size up or down that way to keep my aspect ratio. If I use kind of the middle outer white boxes, that's stretch, right? So we can stretch the design if we desire to, or anything like that. I don't. I just want to size it up appropriately, so I'm going to use the corner box to keep that sized appropriately. Now a little bit of a keyboard shortcut tip here. When I am dragging and sizing and things, if I hold my shift key down, that will actually kind of keep the object centered of where it's currently positioned. Okay, so I could size and keep it centered of where it's currently positioned and all if I hold the shift key down when I do that. All right, so I'd like to get the horse over here on the left hand side, and I'm going to just drop it there. Now I want it to be right there in that position where I just put it, but I want it to be centered up and down. So that's our alignment tool. So the last icon on transform objects, I'm going to open that up, and up here, align to material. I want the up and down arrow, and I want to center that horse head up and down like that. Okay, and then we're going to close the alignment tool. Excellent. All right, so now that I've got it positioned where I want to double click on it again to put it in that transform mode, and I'm going to hold the shift key down to keep it in that position. And now I can play around with my size to see if I want to go larger or smaller, and I want to go slightly larger there, and I think that'll be great, just like that. All right, so let's go ahead now, and we're ready to put in some text, right? And so we're going to go into our text tool. Our text tool, by the way, our row of text tools is on the third row of create vectors, and the first one is the draw text, and that's the one we're going to be using. So we'll open that up. Now, when you're in your text tool, all the fonts that are currently installed on your computer, you can use a variety of fonts, but you can also go online to places like dafont.com, DAFONT.com. That's a great place to find thousands of creative fonts for both personal and commercial use that you can download for free, which is excellent. So dafont.com, I'm a big fan of that site because I've found some really, really excellent fonts to be able to use. All right, so any font that's installed on your computer will be here that you can utilize, and then up here is where we're going to type out our text. Now I want you to notice on the screen that there's a little blue dotted box there, and that blue dotted box, I'm going to move it up here on the screen so you can see it a little bit clearer. This is where the text will actually start. When we start typing out the text, this is where it'll show up, and we can move the text around when we're done typing it, so it's really not critical that you be exactly where you want to be from the beginning. But get close and get your text laid out, and then of course we can move and size and position the text later on in the process if we need to. So over here I'm going to type in Janet's with apostrophe S and hit the enter key and type in ROM. All right. And then I can set my text height if I want. Now if I can't, you see how my text went over the horse? That's not critical or anything right now because I can move it around, and everything. And I'm not going to do its final positioning until I get it laid out, all the text written and everything. But now I want to, kind of cycle through and, determine what font I want to use and everything. And I liked the calligraphy font to begin with. I have some royal signage, which looks really nice. That's a nice looking font. I've got all kinds of fonts here, and you can purchase fonts as well as the free ones, but check out dafont.com. You'll like them. Monotype Corsiva is a really nice font for V carving and things, and I think I'm gonna go with the Monotype Corsiva on this. So let's go ahead, and now that we've got it, I want to go bold on it. I like it a little bit bolder, it's a preference. And now I'm going to size it down and kind of position it where I want. So the first thing I want is I'm going to close my text tool. Always close your tools when you're done using them. And I'm going to go back into my alignment tool. And I want to make sure that I'm aligned up and down just like I did the horse earlier. And I want to get that Janet's room kind of centered there. And Now I can double click on my object to put it in transform mode. And by the way, I don't have to always use transform mode. I can actually open up the size tool and I could size it by putting in a dimension, or I could put in a percentage. Let's say I wanted it 80% of its current size. I could do that, right? So I could use those tools, but sometimes it's just easier when you hold down your shift key and you kind of drag it out. But it's really helpful if you have a mouse and things that you can do that. If you're using a laptop with a finger pad with no mouse, then it gets a little fidgety, right? Because of that finger pad and stuff, you know, and scaling things up and down. So you may want to just use the, you know, tools that are over here at your disposal. And you have move, size, rotate, mirror copy, distort, or align. Okay. All right, so I've got Janet's room here. I like the way the size of that currently is. I am going to bump it over just a little bit to give me a little bit of breathing room from the horse. And I'd like to reduce the spacing a little bit between Janet and rooms. So I'm going to open up my Edit Text Spacing and Curve tool. That's the third icon on that third row of Create Vectors. And that will allow me to put my mouse between those two lines, and you'll see line with two arrows pointing inward. Meaning if I left click on my mouse, it's going to reduce the spacing between those lines. Now if I held the shift key, you see those lines change direction. So as long as I'm holding the shift key when I'm clicking, it's going to push those lines apart. I want to bring them together a little bit, so I'm not going to hold the shift key. I'm just going to put my mouse between there, and I'm going to just click and bring that up. So once I've got that spacing and everything done, I like the way that looks. We're going to go ahead now, and I need to realign the whole thing, Janet's room. You know, I want it center on the board. So I'm going to go over to my alignment tool, and I'm going to make sure it's selected, and I'm going to go with that align to material up and down and get that centered and everything. And excellent, so that looks good. And this is going to complete the design for the sign. Now of course we could go through and do a lot of embellishing and things like that, but this is just a getting started video to make a very first sign, just to, you know, make something cool, see the machine run, and then we're really going to get into designing in the future, right? So right now I have my horse, I've got some text, and I've got a border here, right? And these are all going to be using a V-bit. Your machine would have came with a 60-degree V-bit with it, and that's what we're going to use to carve this entire design. So I'm finished with the design side of the software. So up here, this little box with the blue arrow pointing to the right, I'm going to click on that, and that's going to take me over to the toolpath section of the software. And on the toolpath section of the software, I'm going to open up the V-carve toolpath. I'm going to be using a combination of a V-carve toolpath and a profile toolpath. Let me tell you the difference between the two. The profile toolpath is for my border. Anytime we have a bit following a single line, whether we're cutting on the line, on the inside of the line, or on the outside of the line, we are doing a profile cut. Doesn't matter what bit we're using, it's a profile toolpath. When we're using a V-bit to cut between the lines to carve out these letters in the horse and all, that is a V-carve toolpath. So we're going to be using those two toolpaths to create this. Let's start off with our border here. We've got it selected already, so we might as well start there, right? And we're going to go into the profile toolpath here and open it up. Now, my start depth is going to be the top of the board. We're starting at 0, right? The top of the board. And my cut depth is how deep I want this V-bit to cut. I like a 3/16. I think that is kind of a good one for me. Either 1/8 inch or 3/16 is kind of when I do my borders. That's the two sizes that I choose from, but you can make it whatever size you want, right? Or depth, whatever cut depth you'd like. In our tools section here, so our tools section, we need to hit select and open up our tool database. And in our tool database, we have a V-bit section, and we're going to be choosing the 60-degree 0.25 V-bit. You'll see that on your software, 60-degree 0.25, and we're going to select, and that'll put that tool in that tool section for us. And then on our machining vectors, I want that bit cutting right on the line. I want that bit cutting right on that line to create that border cut. That's all we need to fill out for this border cut. So we're going to go all the way down to the bottom here, and we're going to give it a name. We'll give it a name instead of the default name that comes with it. We're going to go border cut, and then hit calculate. All right. Now, when we hit calculate, that takes us over to the 3D preview, and so we can preview the actual toolpath and simulate it before we even go carve on the table or anything. We can kind of get a good idea of what it's going to look like here. Now, the one thing I want you to do is up under toolpaths, I want you to go up to toolpaths and down to preview simulation quality. Now, by default, that preview simulation quality is set to standard, which is a really low pixelation and things. I'd like you to be either in the very high or the extremely high to give you a nice clean representation of what your cut's actually going to look like when it's carved and things. It won't be all pixelated and stuff like the standard resolution. I like using the extremely high because to me it gives about a 98% representation of what my project's going to look like. Now, it does slow down the actual preview, like cut time and stuff, by being in a higher resolution, but you can set it accordingly to you want. But I do recommend either a high or a very high or extremely high, one of those, just not the standard and everything. So over here on the right hand side in my toolpath preview tool, I have preview selected toolpath, preview all toolpaths, or preview visible. Let's talk about those three differences there. So when a toolpath name is highlighted with a blue bar, that is a selected toolpath. When a toolpath has a check mark in front of it, that is a visible toolpath, meaning we can visibly see that toolpath preview over here. And of course, preview all toolpaths will basically show us or carve all the toolpaths in our list. And we only have one in this case. So any one of those three buttons apply right now. But I'm going to go ahead and click preview visible toolpath and let it carve that out so I can see that border. And that looks very nice. So I'm happy with that. All right, let's go ahead and close out of the preview tool. And over in my 3D view that I'm in, I'm going to switch back to the 2D view. And I've got my horse and Janet's room. Now, both of these, guys and girls, are going to be V-carved. So I can select both of them at the same time. And what I want to make sure of is that when I'm creating my toolpaths and stuff, I got to be mindful that if I have a boundary, that I don't accidentally select that boundary when I'm selecting the other items. And when it comes to selection, let's talk about how you select an item. So of course, I could click on that item to select it, right? Number two, I can draw a box around that item to select it. Now, when it comes to drawing that selection window, is what it's called, there are two ways to draw your selection window. If I draw from left to right, if my object is not 100% in that selection window box, it will not select it if I draw from left to right. Okay? It has to be 100% in the box so it'll select it. Now, if I draw my selection window from right to left, anything that my box touches will get selected. So right to left, anything my box touches will get selected. It doesn't have to be 100% in. And in this case, I'm holding down my left mouse button and I'm dragging my mouse and I'm drawing a box around the horse and the Janet's room text. And it doesn't matter that I'm overlapping my border because the border is not 100% in the box, right? So it's just going to select those two items. Okay. From there, we're going to go into the V-carve toolpath this time. That's the first icon on the second or third row, depending on if you have the laser module tools or not. All right, let's go ahead and open that up. And once again, we're going to be starting at 0, the top of our board. And let's talk about flat depth. And there's a big difference between flat depth and cut depth. So when I'm doing a profile cut or a pocket cut or a drilling operation, those are cut depths. I have to specify a cut depth to tell that bit how deep to cut that pocket or that drilling operation or that profile cut. When it comes to a V-carve toolpath, a V-carve toolpath looks at the space between two lines and it automatically calculates how deep it needs to cut based on the angle of the V-bit that you're using and how far it needs to cut for those two lines to meet at a V. So if we look at this here in Janet's, it looks at the space between two lines and it automatically calculates how deep it needs to cut for those two lines to meet at a V based on the bit that we're going to be using. Okay. If I wanted to limit the cut, and that's what a flat depth is, very big keyword there, limit. If I wanted to limit the cut to a certain depth, then I could put in a flat depth. And that means when it gets to that depth, it will flatten it off. It'll truncate it and flatten it off. So any part of my design that would normally exceed my flat depth will get limited to it. All the other rest of the design, if it's not going to go near or exceed that flat depth, then it'll just carve to its whatever depth it was automatically calculated at. All right, so in this case, I don't want a flat depth. I may need one on the horse, but I want to show you if I get any warnings or anything, I want that to pop up on the screen so you'll see, because the software will warn us if we're going to cut through our material and things like that. Now, I do not want to use a clearance tool, and let's talk about what a clearance tool is. A clearance tool, if I were setting a flat depth, that flat area that gets flattened out, we either have the V-bit doing all that flat work, or we use a clearance tool that does the flat work for us. And that clearance tool would be a flat tipped bit, upcut spiral, downcut, you know, depending on what you're using, 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, 1/16, depending on how, you know, big or small the area is that it's got to do. You would choose the appropriate bit, you know, on what you need. But it would be an end mill bit, you know, just a regular flat surface routing bit. Okay, so flat tipped routing bit, should I say. All right, so if I don't have a flat depth on this and I have my 60-degree V-bit chosen, if I calculate this toolpath, it's going to either warn me that I'm cutting through my material, or it's going to take me right into the preview area, meaning that it successfully calculated. And once again, it is checked, so it is a visible toolpath. So I can go ahead and click that button and I can preview that visible toolpath to see the carving. Now the cool thing about the Vectric software is if you look at the bottom of the screen down here on the right hand side, I'm blocking it. So once again, I'm going to move over to the left side now that we're over here. So let's go ahead and move over to the left. And let's go back into that toolpath, because you might have missed some of the buttons down there. My big old head might have been blocking it and stuff. But we started on that V-carve at 0. We had no flat depth. We had our 60-degree V-bit. And then down at the very bottom, we click calculate, right? So if I wanted to name it, I could. We could go V-carve, text, and horse, right? I can name it if I wanted to, and then I could calculate that toolpath to calculate it, right? So if you were sitting there going, move your head, Laney, move your head, I do apologize about that. All right, so now that we have our preview, what I wanted to show you is if you look at the bottom right of the screen here, when I put my mouse over that preview area, you'll see these X, Y, and Z coordinates pop up, and that's basically showing us from our start position where our mouse is. When it comes to the Z, the top of the material, it's 0, right? Well, if I move the mouse into a cut, we can see that down at the bottom of the screen, that Z position is now a negative number, so negative 0.58, you know, and some change, 5892. The cut, that particular cut is going to cut a little over 1/2 inch and everything. And so you may not want it to cut 1/2 inch. Now that looks good to me. My board is 3/4 inch thick, so I have no problem with it cutting 1/2 inch thick on this. I'm going to leave it exactly like that. But let's say that you wanted to limit that cut. Let's go ahead and set a flat depth in that V carve toolpath. And I want you to notice what I just did. I double clicked on the toolpath to reopen it for editing. Okay. All right, so let's set a flat depth here, and I'm going to set a flat depth of 1/4 of an inch. Okay, 1/4 of an inch. And I have a choice at this point. If I'm using a flat depth, do I want to let my bit do all the work, my V-bit, or do I want to add a clearance tool? I'm going to add a clearance tool, and I'm going to add an 1/8 inch end mill tool. Because it's only going to be doing flat areas and some small areas there, and so 1/4 inch would not be practical. The 1/8 inch may not be practical depending on the area as well, and my V-bit could probably do the work depending on what we see in this next preview. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to calculate this toolpath again, and I'm going to reset the preview. We've got a button right here, reset preview. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and that'll bring it back to a blank board. And now I can preview all the toolpaths, and I want you to notice the toolpaths. We have our border cut, and now we have 2 toolpaths here. We have a V-carve text and horse clear and a V-carve text and horse. Well, the clearing, the one that has clear at the end, that is my end mill. That's my 1/8 inch end mill toolpath. It generated that one. And my V-bit is the V-carve toolpath, that 60-degree V-bit. So it generated those 2 toolpaths. So I'm going to preview all the toolpaths so we can see this cut. All right, and now if we look closely, we can see that that area here has been limited to that 1/4 of an inch and flattened out. Now I want to zoom in to the areas up here and over here, and I want you to see these tool marks here and everything. And basically, wherever the end mill cannot fit, the V-bit will go back and flatten those areas out where that end mill couldn't fit. So what you're seeing is a nice clean area here where the end mill was able to fit, and then you're going to see these tool mark areas here where you kind of see these lines and stuff. Now in realistic, at the CNC machine, the V-bit actually does a very nice job of kind of flattening and clearing out those areas and stuff. But in the software, that cut is very exaggerated so you can identify it. So you can look over here, and we have more over here and stuff where the V-bit has to do the work. So the end mill can cut here, but the V-bit has to do the work over here. And it's very pronounced in the software preview, but in your actual carving, the V-bit actually does a pretty good job of just flattening it out where you don't see those tool marks and stuff. It really depends on the situation, but you can choose whatever you decide. Now, looking at the sign, I think it looks fabulous with or without the flat depth. It's a total choice. If you didn't want to do a tool change, you could just do it with a flat depth and let the V-bit do all that work. It will make it run a little bit longer on the time. But we can also, up here in our preview, we can add some colors. Let's go ahead and add a nice little color there. So if we were going to paint this sign, let's see here. Let's say that she likes a kind of a violet color or whatever, or let's say she likes blues or black, right? So if we were painting this sign, we could kind of get an idea of what it would look like if we painted the sign, right? If we painted those carved areas and things. So that's pretty cool. All right, we're going to go back to just the natural material color, and I'm satisfied with this. I'm not going to keep the flat depth in there. I'm going to let it just V-carve to that 1/2 inch because it's not too deep for me. So I'm going to go back in. I'm going to double click on one of these toolpaths. I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to turn that flat depth off, and I'm going to uncheck the clearance tool, and I'm simply going to calculate this again because I'm just going to let it carve straight to that V shape and all. And again, it's something that it's a preference, you can decide. And if the software warns you, hey, you're going to cut through your material, then yeah, you absolutely want to put a flat depth in because you don't want to cut through. All right, so let's take a kind of a look at our sign here. I think that looks great. So let's go ahead and close out of the preview. Close tool. The close buttons are 100% at the bottom of each of the tools. So you'll always find the close button at the bottom of the tool. Okay, so here now we've got our tool paths created, right? We've got our design done. We've created the tool paths. We've previewed everything and it just, everything, I'm very happy with it. So now we need to save. Now here's the thing. In the beginning, when I created the job, I normally save my file right away, and then I can go back and save, frequently as I'm designing. Let's go back and look at that because I didn't save this design. If you notice up here in the top right corner, it still says new, right? I didn't save any of my work, and if the power would have went out or if the battery would have died on the computer, I could have lost that file because I didn't save the work. So we want to save early and save often. And because I was preoccupied with instructing you guys and girls, I forgot to save, right? What an instructor, huh? All right, so you'll have to look at that as a minor oversight on my part. But let's go ahead and, now that we've caught it, let's do it now. Let's go to the save button here, the little red, white, and blue floppy disk. And in my computer, I have the documents folder here. I have a folder called CNC Jobs. This is a folder that I'm going to recommend that you create so all of your jobs can go in this folder. And I'm going to open this up and I'm going to create a new folder in here, and I'm going to call this the Design First Project folder. Whatever you want to call it, you can, right? And I'm going to open that folder up, and now that's where I want to create and store all of my files, my design file and my toolpath files. So let's call this Janet's Room and save that. And then it'll go through and save the project. You'll see up here now it doesn't say new anymore, it says Janet's Room. So we want to save early, and as we're drawing, we want to come over and save often, update our changes, because there's no auto save in the Vectric software. It may be a feature down the road one day that they put in, but currently right now there is no auto save. It's up to us to auto save. So save early, save often. So saving our design and saving our toolpaths are two completely different operations. Okay, our design is our vectors and our design and everything, this whole Vectric project that we just created. Our toolpaths are our specific G-code coordinates that we bring over to the controller software, that Planet-CNC TNG motion controller software, and we run from there. Okay, we run that toolpath. So we want to save our toolpaths now. Now, when you save your toolpaths, you're going to have options of post processors to choose from. You can choose the Digital Wood Carver inch tap post processor or the Helical Arcs inch tap. One of those two. I'm going to recommend the Helical Arcs inch tap, but you can choose one of the two. They're both pretty much identical. For me, the Helical Arcs creates a little bit of a shorter G code, a little smoother around corners. It handles corners a little differently than the standard Digital Wood Carver post processor. So I like the Helical Arcs, and I would recommend that being your default, but you can choose one of those two. All right, so we've got this post processor set. Now I'm going to come down and I'm going to check off the box that I want of the toolpath I want to select. But it's very important. Checking off that box doesn't necessarily mean it's selecting the correct file. Up here at the top of the Save Toolpath tool, I have three options: Selected Toolpath, Visible Toolpath to one file, and Visible Toolpath to multiple files. So selected toolpath, when an object is selected, remember the name is selected, that means that's blue highlight, right? So notice in my toolpath to be saved, it's going to save whichever one is selected because of that choice up there. Visible toolpaths to one file means the toolpath that is checked off will be visible to one file. Okay, and visible toolpaths to multiple files means that it's going to save those toolpaths into two separate files, multiple, two separate files and things. It won't save them together. Well, in this case, we're going to go visible toolpaths to one file because both of these toolpaths use the same 60-degree V-bit, and we want to save them as one file. So we're just running one file because they use the same bit. If the toolpaths used different bits, then they would be saved individually. Okay, either the selected toolpath, visible toolpath to one file with the appropriate toolpath checked, or output multiple files, and it'll save them all with different names and things. All right, in this case, visible toolpaths to one file, helical arcs, inch tap for the post processor, digital wood carver, and we've got them both checked off, and we're going to hit save. And in our design first project folder that I created a moment ago, we're going to save this. Now, we can name our toolpaths anything that we want to name it. I'm going to recommend a way of naming your toolpath that is beneficial to you and also makes sense. The toolpath name is going to start off with an 01, a number, 01, 02, 03, 04. Basically, this represents the order that the toolpath is going to run for that job. Because I only have one file that I'm creating for this job, but some jobs I might have 2, 3, 5, or 10 files to run. And I want to name them or number them in an order which one I run first, second, third, fourth, and so on. So 01 is going to be this, and I'm going to put an underscore to separate that. And I'm going to put in the size of my board, 14 by 10 by 0.75. And then I'm going to put an underscore after that. So now I've got the order that it runs and the size of the material. Now I'm going to put in the name of the job. So I'm going to call it Janet's room and put an underscore after that. So now I know what file it is or what job it is. And then I'm going to put in my router bit information. And for me, it's a 60 DEG V bit. And if you're using the Whiteside 1541 60 degree V bit that came with your machine, it would be the same for you as well. Okay, so once we have our file name in, that is it. What this does is when I'm at my machine and I load this file into my controller software, I know for this job that this is the first file that I run. My board that I need to clamp on the table needs to be 14 by 10 by 3/4, and I need to put a 60 degree V-bit in my router, right? Makes sense, right? It tells us all the things that I need to know to run that job on my CNC machine. All right, let's go ahead and hit save to save that, and congratulations, you have just created and designed your first project. So the next step is to follow the steps in the video on how to carve your very first project, and that will take you from this stage to the CNC machine to get our board clamped on the table, get our bit in the router, get everything zeroed out, and run this file that we just created. So congratulations for making it this far. Have some fun with it, play around with your designs, be creative, and I will see you in the next video.